listening to STAGR Cast, brought to you by STAGR Gear. All right, we're jumping back in another episode of STAGR Cast. I think this is episode number 9 now, and we're sitting here with Dr. Christopher Jenkins. Is that right?
That's me. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, glad to have you here. Isaac's actually the one that brought you up, and ever since he brought you up to me, I've been super looking forward to meeting up with you and talking with you, because it seems like you got a lot of interesting stuff going on. So for those that don't know you, why don't you give us a little background on yourself, what you do, what brings you up to these parts, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, first, I'm really appreciative you guys having me on, and for Isaac being my personal turkey guide. And no, but yeah. So as you mentioned, my name's Chris Jenkins, and I've basically been working in wildlife research and conservation my whole life. And for my day job, I run a wildlife conservation nonprofit, and we work primarily on non-game animals like turtles and snakes and salamanders, and we do a lot of research and we do a lot of conservation. But there's a lot of intersection with the other half of my world, which is hunting and fishing. And as an example, there's a lot of examples, but as an example, there's a really rare turtle down in Georgia where I live, and this turtle is called a gopher tortoise, and it's on the verge of becoming an endangered species. So we have a program to conserve this species, and one of the primary ways we've been conserving it is by working with the state and other nonprofits. And essentially what we've been doing is buying land, important pieces of land for this turtle. And so we're buying these properties, but almost every single one of these properties is being transferred over to the state and becoming a WMA. So while you have this property that's protected for a turtle, over the last 10 years, we've helped create, hundreds of thousands of acres of land where you can go and hunt, fish, bird watch, hike, good. Whatever it is you're interested in.
That's awesome.
So that's part of my world, and then the other part is that I'm heavily involved in conservation, more from a hunting and fishing perspective as well. And I've really been involved from working with a nonprofit called Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I've been associated with that organization basically since it started. I helped build up the Southeast chapter, and then I founded the Georgia chapter and led that for a few years. And just a couple of years ago, I moved up to the North American board, where I play a variety of roles, but basically I'm working hard on public land conservation, in particular for hunters and anglers. So I get to do a lot kind of in the hunting and fishing world from a conservation perspective as well.
Yep.
What else would be good to know about me? I live in Georgia, as I mentioned, which is probably different than a lot of your guests.
That's a whole change up.
Yeah, but I live in a different, like probably most of your listeners think of the word Georgia and have a picture in their head, and the part of Georgia that I live in is much different than that. I live up in the Chattahoochee National Forest, which is big mountains in the northern part of the state that connects to western North Carolina, connects to places that people would know like Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and the landscape looks very much like that. It's kind of like a southern version of like the White or the Green Mountains. Okay. Really big mountains.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Yeah, you were throwing out some numbers earlier today. How many 6,000 footers are in Georgia, you were saying?
Well, in Georgia, we actually don't have any, but I was saying, like, if you take east of the Mississippi, all the 6,000 footers.
Yep.
I thought there were 2 up here, but you're saying there's just one.
I think
which
so.
Would be Mount Washington. And so let's just say, I can't remember the number. It's somewhere in this ballpark, but let's say there are 36,000 footers. I think it's 20 something. Almost all of them are in that western North Carolina, East Tennessee, a couple in Virginia. So that
so real close to you.
Yeah, that area I live in. I mean, I live very close to some of them. I live right on the North Carolina border. So big mountains.
Those mountains dwarf ours. Yeah, really. I mean,
you don't really think about it when you're thinking of the Southeast like that, but they really do. Yeah, it's just a whole different. I mean, you don't have the snow and stuff that we have up here, so it kind of mitigates that. But
yeah, they're big. They're expansive. They cover. They really. Most of North Georgia are big mountains, huge part of western North Carolina, really large mountains, East Tennessee, and then southwestern Virginia. So it's a pretty significant block of big woods.
Right,
So.
like big backcountry stuff. Like
lots of wilderness areas and wild and scenic rivers. I've got 2 wilderness areas just in my county, and again a wild and scenic river. And
Gotcha.
It's a really wild country.
How's the access down there to like the big woods compared to like up here? Would you say is it a lot easier to get into, or is there spots where you can go miles and miles and not see a road, or how does it kind of compare to up here from your experience?
Yeah, I'd say it's fairly similar.
Gotcha.
The access pattern would be maybe similar to the Green Mountains here, where you have real low density of Forest Service roads that'll kind of get you back, but they aren't extensive. There are a lot of areas where you can take a Forest Service road, and from that point, I mean, you could go just really miles and miles of nothing. And then in Georgia in particular, in the Chattahoochee National Forest, we have one wilderness area called the Cohutta, and I mean it's the second largest wilderness in the Appalachian Mountain chain, and it's big. It's I lived out west for quite a while, and I mean it's at that scale. When you're in there, it's as far as you can see, there's multiple river systems and multiple mountain ranges, and I mean it's really big.
Yep.
And again, some big wild and scenic rivers that in like a linear fashion are incredibly wild.
Yep.
So
how's like the deer density down there? Because like you get up here in our mountains and the deer density's really low. Is it the same out there because there's not as much cutting and less feed and stuff, or how does it work down there?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, across the state of Georgia, it varies incredibly.
Yep.
So you have, if you go down into like South Georgia, that would be probably what would come to mind for most people when they think of the southeastern deer hunt.
Yep.
And we would have relatively high deer densities, large deer in terms of antlers in particular, and just high densities and all. You see a lot of deer. We can shoot 12 deer a year in the state.
Oh wow.
You can shoot 2 bucks and 10 does. But then as you move up, I think some of our biggest bucks would actually be in the middle part of the state. So the state of Georgia is kind of broken into 3 regions. The north, which we've been talking about, which is the mountains.
Yep.
The wildest part of the state. And then there's the part closest to the coast is called the coastal plain. And then in between that is called the Piedmont. And the Piedmont's kind of an in-between. It's kind of like a rolling hills area, whereas the coastal plain is very flat. And so the coastal plain would really have the most deer. But the Piedmont also has high densities of deer, and that's where you get really large deer. All these big deer you see come, not all, but a lot of the big deer you see coming out of Georgia are coming out of that Piedmont region, where you're getting 160 to 200 inch deer every year.
Yep.
So,
yep.
But then you get to the mountains where I live, and I do hunt all of them, but I live in the mountains, and I kind of think of that as my home hunting. And that gets, it's very similar to here. So, I try to hunt Vermont in particular most years, and I would say from a deer density perspective, to get to your original question, it's really probably pretty similar, like really low densities of deer. They're not everywhere, and it's really hard to hunt them because of that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, do you think it's easier to get on bucks in the big woods of Georgia in the mountains, or is it easier to get on bucks up in this kind of country?
I would say it's different, and let me think about that. If you have snow up here, and it's a little hard for me to gauge that exactly, because I do try to come up here and hunt most years, but in a good year I can hunt 4 days up here, whereas down there, similar to you guys, I'm living in those woods year round and spending a lot of time learning the deer and learning the forest. But I would say if you use the appropriate technique down there, we stand a good chance of shooting a nice deer every year. You're at least going to have a handful of opportunities. You go to South Georgia now, and some of these properties, your opportunities at mature deer could be semi-daily, depending on what you're targeting. But in the mountains, if you hunt hard and you use certain strategies, you can have an opportunity to mature deer, probably a couple opportunities in a year. And I'm assuming if I lived here and spent the kind of time that you guys spent, it would kind of be the same, that if I hunted hard for the whole season, I'd have an opportunity at maybe 1, 2, 3 say at least 3.5-year-old deer in a season.
Yep.
So
Yep.
probably pretty similar in that regard.
Yeah. I remember watching, last year, I think, a hunting public video. They were down in the mountains of Georgia, I think it was. And they talked about how difficult the mountain hunting was. I think they ended up getting a really nice one. Aaron did, I think.
Yeah.
They did, yeah.
But they talked about how hard it was compared to everything else they were doing from Iowa and stuff, how that was like the most difficult but most rewarding. And you could see the terrain through there. It was thick and rolling.
I always thought it would be really hard down there, and I don't know if I heard you say this on another podcast or not, or if I just dreamt it up, but that, there's these big mountains and like the entire thing's just solid oak. Mm-hmm. So like you come up here and you hunt pieces, you hunt mountains where, let's say, out of the entire mountain, only 10% of it is oak. Mm-hmm. So you can narrow a lot of your, searching down to that one little spot to get into deer or, deer sign.
Yep.
Whereas down there, it's like you're literally trying to find a needle in a haystack, where it's like everywhere they step, they have acorns to feed on.
Yeah.
So I feel like that would be a big challenge.
Yeah, it is. It is a challenge. And so first, back to the hunting public, I would say nothing against them. They're incredible hunters. But I would say that the area they were hunting, I would call the foothills. I wouldn't even call that the mountains proper, where
Gotcha.
I typically hunt. It'd be like maybe equivalent to like these lower hills, like in this, the Vermont Valley or the Champlain Valley, as compared to being, say, up on top of the Green Mountains.
Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
So if you were to go to those foothill areas, it's a little more like the Piedmont. You start getting into a little bit higher density deer. But what they did, and Aaron pulling out that buck, was quite a feat, because that particular place that they were hunting is one of the, receives some of the most deer hunting pressure in the entire state of Georgia. So it was pretty incredible what they did. But I still would say that the mountain hunting that we're talking about is kind of different from what you saw in that show. Okay. Bigger mountains for sure. But talking about the landscape itself, so the mountains are big, as I mentioned. It's they're really just significant, and they remind me kind of the White Mountains. The Green Mountains to some degree, but they're in most places are kind of less rounded.
They're more sharp.
We didn't have glaciers like all through here. You had glaciers come through these landscapes and just churn and bulldoze these mountains, and so you have all these swamps, and we don't have any of that. It's all of the shape of our mountains all has to do with erosion and water over time. There was no ice that came in and like ripped through the side of a mountain. So they're very steep, and as you mentioned, it's almost completely hardwoods. And I mean, we have some of the same species you have here. We have white pines, and we have hemlocks. As you get into those lower foothill areas, we have like pitch pine and some other short leaf pine, some other things like that. But generally, it's just dominated by hardwoods. You get white oaks, red oaks of different types, hickories, really diverse. But a lot of black cherry, but a lot of hardwood producing mass. We do get. It'd almost be like when you start to get to the elevations up here where you would like go out of the trees and it would turn to like alpine. Yep. You start getting, I don't know what that line would be, 5,000-ish and higher, or maybe higher than that. But as you start to get to those elevations down there, say certainly around 6,000, like we get into like a spruce fir forest like you guys would have here at, I don't know, what, 3,000.
It's like around 3. Yeah, around 3,000.
I'd say.
A lot of the hardwood kind of stops, and it starts to become softwood and like very mossy everywhere, and yeah.
And so we get that, but that's
way
like
higher.
I said, that's like 1,000, 2,000 feet higher.
And it must be a temperature thing, right? That's
sir.
Kind of like
And I typically don't hunt those areas as much because I don't have some of that right near my house. But back to your original statement about the hardwoods, there's so many hardwoods that it's. I mean, in certain years you could have acorns everywhere. Or acorns nowhere. It's also an important part of the strategy we use to hunt the deer in those big woods, in that you can also have interesting patterns where like you only have hardwoods really high, say like at 4,000 feet or 3,000 and higher, or you might have years where you only have hardwood mass low, and so that how the mass produces each year is really important. And I spend a lot of time in the woods year round, and in the summer I'm often out there with binoculars, like looking up in the treetops to see the acorn mass, and I'm definitely paying a lot of attention to that as the season kicks off. And I usually start hunting in September with bears, and the bear hunting is very heavily linked to the mass as well. So that's where I really start to kind of first get a feel for what the mass crop's going to be like. But that's critically important for how you hunt down there, because it's just dominates the landscape.
Gotcha.
But you can get flooded by it too.
Right, with the acorns.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, this little stand of trees or these two trees. Some years you have that where one stand is producing more, but sometimes they're just everywhere.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty bizarre because up here you find like the spot of oaks.
Yeah, and then
you better be looking in there. You know,
that's the hub.
That's
That's where you start.
That's what John was talking about last week in our shed hunt episode. You find that little chunk of feed.
Yeah,
and that's where the sheds are going to be, and the other deer are going to be. I got a question for both of you. So, you're from Georgia. You're from up this way, obviously. How did you guys connect? Because I don't think I heard you guys before. How did you guys connect? It's going to be kind of a bizarre story.
Yeah. Well, I think how it all started, it was a few years ago. I heard him on another podcast, and I thought what he was talking about was, interesting, like the big mountains down that way. I've always kind of been intrigued with the big mountains, like, North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee. I always look at them on the maps, and they just look giant, So I heard you talking about it. I thought it was really cool. So I followed you on Instagram or Facebook, requested you, and then, like, I think it was like a year later or something, you messaged me and said that you hunt up this way or something. We started a conversation, but yeah, so that's basically how, through social media, basically, is the short answer.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in New England.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I've lived all over. I lived in the Rocky Mountains for a long time before moving to the Southeast. And so as a child, I spent some time in southern Vermont. And then it was kind of the place that my grandfather always hunted. That was like his big trip. And so I've kind of always, when I can, I've always come back to Vermont because it's just almost like nostalgic, or like connects me back to where my family used to hunt.
Yep.
And so I've always been drawn to hunt here, and we connected around that, and
some
snake stuff, some snake pictures going back and forth. And,
So your career's kind of brought you all over the place then.
Yeah, I like I said, I was in New England till I was in my early 20s, and then I moved out west, lived in the Rocky Mountains, kind of near Yellowstone National Park, for about 10 years. And then moved down to Georgia, and I've been there for 13 years now.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Yeah. How do you like hunting up here?
I love it. I would say that snow tracking is my favorite type of hunting. I can't claim to be great at it. I just don't do it that much. I get a couple days.
Yeah, you don't have how much time for that.
But like, I think I was telling you this morning, Isaac, like how I kind of like conceptualize my hunting in my head is that, like, I think of this book that I read called Hunting from Home, and it's always fascinated me, people who live in a place and they know a place so well, and they're just like steeped in like the history and the woods, and they know the plants and the animals and how everything fits together, and they're out there and they're hunting and fishing, and so I strive to do that where I live in these southern mountains. But then the other part of me loves adventure, and I love to travel, and so I combine that with the hunting, and every year I'm probably making 4, 5, 6 hunting trips, anywhere in the country. I went to Mexico for turkeys this year, for example. So and those are more, it's slightly different. That's like an adventure for me, and Vermont's like that too. Like I don't come here like needing to harvest a giant buck. It's like don't get me wrong, I would love to track down a mature deer and harvest it and bring it home, but that's not the reason that I come here, or the reason I go out west, or whatever it might be. So
just like the experience of the whole Vermont hunting scene and everything.
Yeah, just that history of my family really brings me back. But I will say that tracking, I love any type of hunting where you're like you're completely immersed in it. You're not passive. You're like
aggressive,
integrated. You're aggressive at times, but you're like part of the process. And I certainly do a lot of sitting when I hunt at times, but I like styles of hunting where you're like moving and reading the landscape and thinking and listening, and so tracking for me is just, I love it because it's just so much of that. You're just you're nonstop. There's no time to think about any other problem you have in your life. Your head is just processing that everything that's happening around you. So that I love that.
Yeah,
so
that's the beauty of tracking. You can just
It's
forget
addicting,
everything.
for sure, yeah.
You're fully engaged the whole time. It's you versus the deer.
Yeah.
That's why I fell in love with it too, and a lot of guys, and that's why it's growing. I think.
Yeah,
Something
sure.
about that.
It takes a certain kind of guy, but
Yeah.
you know, if you like it, you like it.
Mm.
Yeah.
So circling back to bear hunting, how do you bear hunt in the Georgia mountains?
Well, first of all, there's a pretty strong kind of like a historic just tradition of bear hunting in the Southern Appalachians, and it's Appalachians down there, Appalachians up here. But anyway, so down in the Appalachians, it's there's a real strong bear hunting culture and history, but the way the states lay out now is that in Georgia, you cannot hunt with dogs. In North Carolina, you can. In Tennessee, you can. And so we don't hunt with dogs in Georgia. And basically what we do is that the bear hunting is certainly best early. And our archery season opens up in September. And our bear season's basically perfectly in line with our deer season. So bears open September 15th. And so when archery opens, I'm not deer hunting. I mean, if I happen to bump into a deer, which I almost never would because I'm in the mountains and I'm moving. When I bear hunt, I'm always moving. And so what we typically do is I go to fairly remote areas and I get up on high ridges. And I've talked about how all these mass producing trees, dominate the landscape. Well, right when bear season opens in kind of mid-September, the white oaks are, their acorns are just perfect. And so the bears are in the trees feeding on the white oaks. And I would say that time of year, about 50% of the bears that you see hunting will be in a tree and about 50% be on the ground. And so what we do is get to pretty remote high ridges and do these kind of slow walks or hikes, and you're really listening for one, because the bears will be up in these trees, and what they do is they with their teeth and their paws, they're snapping off the branches, and then they drop this acorn-laden branch down to the base of the tree, and they'll just pop a bunch of those, and they drop all those, and then they climb down, and they eat all those acorns, and they're up there eating them as well. And then the sign you see from that is just incredible. You're walking on a remote ridge and you're coming through a grove of white oaks, and there are literally piles of semi-fresh branches, piles of bear scat. When you get into those areas, you know that you're into a heavy feeding area. And at that point, sometimes you might sit on that type of sign. Sometimes you'll still hunt through it, use different techniques, but the key is finding that sign. And we have pretty high density bear populations, and I have them right at my house. Literally 3 or 4 days ago, I looked out my kitchen window and there's a bear standing next to my truck. So
I think I saw that on your Instagram, right?
Yeah.
Taking off and down the driveway.
And that when I started filming it, it had already moved 30 feet. It was, I literally looked out the window and I was like, oh. Yeah, and last year I was hunting a bear up behind my house. I have a real nice white oak flat on my land that the bears hit really hard. So I can be hunting 10 minutes from my house. And anyway, so I was in that, and I was hunting this bear. I'd seen it multiple times. It was archery. I used a recurve, so I could get real close. And I hadn't got a shot at it yet. And then I was done for the afternoon. I had to go home for dinner or something. So I'm walking back to the house, and I can hear my wife and my daughter in my driveway. I'm just a couple hundred yards from them. They're doing something in the driveway. And all of a sudden, probably about halfway between me and them, I see this bear. And it's a giant bear. We're talking 350-pound bear. And it's just standing there. It actually saw me and spooked off. But my point being that, had a 350-ish pound bear 100 yards from my wife and daughter right near my house. And that's rare. I will say most bear hunting we do is very remote. But but I hunt them right in my backyard too. So.
Okay, it sounds like a really fun way to hunt bears.
Yeah.
They'll just be, like I said earlier, you were telling me how you do it. It's like squirrel hunting for monster squirrels, because I know when I was a kid I loved to squirrel hunt, and I'm always looking up, trying to catch them in the trees, feeding, or listening for the nuts, listening to them. That's what I kind of I envision you guys doing, is just walking through the woods, looking up.
You're looking up as you're listening. you're kind of going to the edge of a ridge and
Right.
listening down to the side and
Yeah.
you're looking up in the trees as much as you're looking down. It is a lot of fun.
It sounds like a lot of fun. Up this way, they don't really do that in the oaks.
No,
they do that in the
like
beech trees.
Yeah.
They go up in the beech trees and they'll like pull in all the branches and make these like big nests.
Yeah.
Where they like sit there and just gorge themselves on beech nuts, but they definitely don't. They just eat the acorns off the ground. I think we have very few white oaks up this way.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, I mean, you
very
go
few.
north here, there's like not many oaks at all, really.
Yeah,
Like,
no.
my way up in this, it's just all beaches, and you see
Yeah.
when you're out tracking deer and stuff, you see all the claw marks in the trees going up there, and then when
In
you
the
come,
beaches?
yeah, and then you
Yeah.
come across an area when you're in there's snow, and just everything for like a 50-yard circle is just completely tore up off the ground. It's
Oh
pretty
yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
And then what's interesting is if you get one in a tree, you need to think about what you're going to do because, say the bear doesn't know you're there. It is in Georgia. I think some states it's not, but in Georgia it's legal to shoot him in the tree. But you gotta think if you shoot him in the tree,
If he's comfy up there in a crotch
is it
or
going
something.
to get stuck, or do you so do you shoot up there? Or do you let it come down?
Right. You might have to wait him out or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
no kidding. So like if there's a bear up in a tree, I don't know if you've had this situation before. If they see you, will they just kind of like sit up there and wait you out, or will they come down and run?
I don't know if I've ever had one in the tree that saw me. I've certainly have bumped into bears and had them immediately go up into trees and during season.
Gotcha.
But I haven't ever shot one in a tree. I've always kind of waited for them to come down or, so.
It's gonna be pretty difficult to shoot one out of a tree with a recurve, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, and then, that too.
But
But
regular
we also
season
hunt
too.
during
Yeah, no,
rifle
I get you.
season as well. We have so our archery opens mid-September, and then about mid-October we have a week of muzzleloader, and then we transition into rifle, and then we go rifle right halfway through January.
Gotcha.
So
And you said you pack out all of your bears that you shoot.
yeah, I mean, unless I was talking about that bear behind
Right,
my house.
right.
If something's right behind
Yeah,
my
yeah,
house,
yeah.
but yeah, no, I pack out all the bears, all the deer,
Oh, the deer
in the
too. I
mountains,
was gonna say. Yeah, that's
down in the lowlands, depending on the situation, I might not. But again, unless I shot something like right behind my house. But typically, I'm breaking them down and packing them out like you would out west.
that's cool.
Maybe you just have to process them pretty quick down there because you don't get the cool nights and stuff as much as we get up here where you can leave a deer out.
Well, he said earlier, you said when you're bear hunting, it's like pretty cold, right?
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it can be. And certainly as you get later in the season. So our rut, this is another important difference. So if you go to the south, deer in general across much of North America were almost gone, right? And so a lot of deer were put back into the south.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go to states like Georgia, and you can Google this. If you Google Georgia rut map, there's a map of the state, and it'll show you what timing all the different deer rut, and you can do the same in Alabama, and it's so diverse that in Georgia, for example, if you wanted to move around, you could start the season on September 15th, and you could hunt all the way to January 15th when it closes, and you could literally be hunting deer in the peak of the rut the entire time.
Really?
Because the coast ruts in September, and then there's an area that ruts in October. But so in the mountains, it's a late rut. And so our deer, like peak rut for the mountain deer is like basically the first week of December.
Really?
Yeah, so it
works its way upstate, kind of, in tiers.
Yeah,
somewhat?
but then we also have a January rut, and that's as far south as you can get in the southwest corner of the state. So,
Interesting.
and then you go over to Alabama, and there are ruts in Alabama in like February.
Yeah.
And so, but but in the mountains, anyways, it can get pretty cold. Like oftentimes, with both bear and deer, I hang them. But once I get them out, even if they're broken down, I'll still hang them.
Yeah.
But in the lowlands, yeah. So down in the coastal plain, I have a property down there that I hunt, and certainly there are a lot of days where you'll kill a deer in the morning, and you have to cut it up that day, because it's going to be 85 degrees.
Yep.
So
Yeah, gets to them pretty quick.
So we've been talking about the hardwood landscape of the mountains in Georgia. Like what other features are like a big factor in the deer habitat down that way?
yeah, it's in. So again, it's mostly dominated by hardwoods, but there's another really important component, which again is something different than most of the places up here, and that is that we have these mountain laurel and rhododendron thickets. They call them like rhododendron hells because they can be. I've been climbing through them up on the Appalachian Trail in North Carolina, trying to get through them where I'm literally like in the branches. My feet aren't even touching the ground. I'm kind of like crawling through the air. They're so thick, and they can be expansive. They can be entire mountainsides. I'm talking hundreds of acres sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so, with all that hardwood, the forest is really open, but then you have these really dense areas. So you kind of have this real contrast, really open and then incredibly dense. And, as we were talking earlier, it might be somewhat analogous to getting into like thick green growth for deer, up in these mountains. Yep. So that's a really important component. The deer, not always, but oftentimes will bed in those. And they'll, they also bed kind of, using elevation and, kind of, the view down the mountains. They'll do that quite a bit as well, but they'll go into these rhododendron and into these laurels and bed in there. It's so thick in there.
Okay.
So,
yeah, it's like perfect habitat.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that laurel in Massachusetts, and then also there's a lot of it down in the Catskills where I've hunted. And whenever you find that mountain laurel, let me tell you, there's an abundance of deer and bear and every other critter. I wish it grew up this way, because if it did, we'd have a lot more deer. I mean, it's perfect habitat for them. Yep. They have literally, where I've seen it, they have like tunnels through the stuff, like trails that just, it's like rose bushes kind of, but there's no prickers.
Yeah.
That's kind of
interesting.
Nice.
Yeah, it is hard to move through though.
It definitely is. It's like viney.
Sometimes it's impossible. Yeah.
So I see a lot of bushes on like people's front lawns around here. Would that be rhododendron?
Yeah. So rhododendron has been used like in landscaping,
and it looks a lot like laurel.
Yeah.
I always see like, oh my god, mountain laurel, but it's not.
And it's but in the wild mountain laurel, it, like I said, it can be hundreds of acres. It can be entire mountainsides. And it can be kind of short and thick. It can be really tall. It can be, 10 plus 20 feet tall. So, and just incredibly thick. But it is a major form of, cover. And oftentimes your big bucks, even during the rut, they'll oftentimes be, kind of be like skirting through the edges of the laurel. There'll oftentimes be like a nice trail, like say just inside the laurel. And a lot of, I guess we'll talk about like how we get to where we hunt in that landscape. But once you get there, there's lots of different ways you might try to hunt a deer. But one is, oftentimes you can find these little chutes that like drop into a laurel where there's like a 10-foot wide opening, and you literally might sit those types of openings where the deer are going to cross, or sit edges of the laurel. You're almost like anywhere you hunt white-tailed deer. I mean, white-tailed deer like thick stuff, and so you're usually taking that laurel rhododendron component into play while you're figuring out how to hunt them.
Yep, that's interesting.
Okay,
I got a question for you. This is kind of not to change subjects fully, but from a conservation standpoint, and being that you've seen all sorts of states and different habitats for animals and stuff, do you see anything that like Vermont and Northeast states that you think could do better compared to like what the South's doing? Like, do you see anything that you think the state could do better that would help the deer habitat?
Yeah, and I'll go beyond deer habitat, and I'll just talk about wildlife diversity in general. Absolutely. So in my role at BHA, I recently passed a policy, which becomes like an organization-wide policy. It's a statement. This is what BHA stands for. And we have them on everything from bighorn sheep and diseases, just a diversity of policy issues. But I passed a policy issue that we called the Eastern Forest Management Policy. And so a consistent problem that we see up and down the Appalachian Mountains is a lack of forest management. And we have the same thing down in the Southern Appalachians, and you have it here. And, and what you end up with is primarily an even-aged, old-growth type forest. Like everything's heading towards climax. And when you have that, you just have lower diversity all around. And I'm not just talking about deer. I'm talking about the things I rattlesnakes and other animals. Like diverse forests promote, diverse wildlife communities. So, at BHA, we really support more forest management, meaning, depending on the landscape and the habitats, might be more prescribed fire. It might be more mechanical or logging type treatments. And don't get me wrong, I love wilderness. I love old growth forest, and there should be components of that. But we've moved to a state through much of the Appalachians where it's like we've become the playground for urban areas. And
it's a good point.
I'm making a generalization here, and I'm recognizing that. But in general, when people come, they don't understand the ecological connections and the importance of, say, young forest. They just see, if they see some logging, they automatically think it's a bad thing. But prehistorically and, historically, these forests would have had all these natural disturbances. There would have been fires. There would have been extensive beaver wetlands. There would have been ice storms and tornadoes and on. And these things would be, changing the forest, and there'd be young forest and middle-aged forest and old forest. So my point, the biggest thing I think from a conservation perspective, and this is from top to bottom throughout the Appalachian Range, is we need to, increase the diversity of our forests. And unfortunately, a lot of those natural disturbances don't happen at the same level. So we need to
because we prevent them.
Because we prevent them in some cases, fire. Down where we are, we used to have bison and elk, and those things are gone, and those would influence the forest structure. But anyways, physically going in and making sure we just don't have an even age old growth forest, because that's not good for deer. It's not good for turkeys. That's not good for the rattlesnakes.
I agree.
All of these things.
Yeah.
So
I think that's, you look at Vermont compared to like New Hampshire and Maine. There's like hardly any cutting in Vermont versus like a spot that I hunted this year. There was a windstorm probably 5 years ago. And in that area this year, because there's some new growth coming up through, that area was loaded.
Right.
So I think select cutting in some of our state forests would benefit a lot.
It would.
Every species. Because, a lot of state forests up my way, there isn't a turkey population. There isn't a lot of, it's just barren, and a lot of it is.
Because it's just big, huge maples.
Maples and beach. And that's it. But that's a good point.
Don't get me wrong, you can plan these things. So say there's an important, lichen or mushroom or whatever it is that likes old growth forest, and you plan, this block should be set aside and should never be cut. And you should do it in a strategic way. I'm not advocating for clear cutting everything,
absolutely.
But if you don't clear cut anything, I think when I talked about this, people coming up from urban areas, they're thinking that they're doing the best thing, but they're actually hurting biodiversity. The forests are less diverse.
A lot of those people don't think about it. They're coming up for the weekend to go hiking up Mount Washington or Mount Mansfield, Camel's Hump, whatever, all up this way, and they just they want to see the big trees and nature, and they don't think about the ecological impact.
They think about Bambi and how beautiful the big trees look, and how they can see 400 yards up through the hardwoods.
But Bambi's got to eat.
Yeah, that's right. And back to the laurel thing. So like up this way, we don't have the laurel. So when our old growth stuff comes up, it's just, like I just said, you can see 400 yards through the open hardwoods. It's a dead forest, right? So down your way, at least you guys have the laurel. So like in those like big old growth stuff, you still have that undergrowth. There's still cover. So there's still that diversity, or the security cover that they need to live and be safe. With up this way, if we don't have logging, we have nothing. For the deer. They're going to be in either a swamp or the tippity top of a mountain, and that's usually what it is up here if there's no cutting.
And there's not a lot of animals like up in there, and that's why a lot of people gravitate towards hunting private land. Then you get hunter landowner confrontations, and it's a chain reaction all the way down through. But.
And one difference down south that I see, so there is, like on the Chattahoochee National Forest where I live, it's probably pretty similar to the Green Mountain in terms of timber harvest. There's very little of it. But one thing that there's more of is that there's a lot of prescribed fire. Like it's just part of, southern cultures and forest. And so even in the mountains, and in the lowlands, there's certainly a lot of prescribed fire. But in the mountains, there's certainly a fair amount of prescribed fire, which does create a lot of diversity. a lot of food for deer and helps, again, rattlesnake habitat and all of these things. So.
Yep. Being that you're looking at like rattlesnakes and reptiles and stuff like that, does the deer and rattlesnake habitat overlap quite a bit, would you say? Because you're in the woods a lot looking for snakes and stuff. What do you see? How do they line up?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I would say that rattlesnakes are predators, obviously, and are feeding on animals that are feeding on the same things that deer are, being acorns and all of that. So yeah, certainly rattlesnakes down in the southern mountains are focused on foraging in a lot of the same forests that you would find deer and bear and turkey and everything else focused on eating acorns. So I just kind of view it all as one big, they're all connected.
Total ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Adam, I have a theory about rattlesnaks and sheds.
Let's hear it.
If you'd
So
like
you had to get this into the podcast.
Yes, I did. Chris thought this was brilliant. Okay. All right. He thinks that I should. So, basically, my theory is in the Northeast, we have a lack of rattlesnakes. Therefore, way more rodents because,
Okay, I see where this is going.
You get where this is going?
Okay,
so
continue.
all the sheds, let's say in Vermont, are usually chewed up by around April, May. We're not finding old bleached out antlers that are 5 years old like they do in Pennsylvania, which is full of rattlesnakes.
So you need more rattlesnakes.
That's
in Vermont,
what I'm saying.
And then you'll have better shed hunting.
Maybe. I'm not sure. We haven't really tested it.
That's a good point.
Scientifically, but it's something I've always thought, and it could be true.
It could be because they do get chewed up, and I would say Vermont is probably the hardest state to shed hunt in out of the Northeast.
And like you look at like Steve Shirk, a guy down in PA, and he's finding these bleached out antlers that are like sometimes he finds them, they're like 5-6 years old, and they're just laying there, pristine, beautiful, never been chewed on once. It's because them snakes, they set up like a food plot. They set up right on that antler, and they just wait for that squirrel to come down, start nibbling,
funny.
bang.
Huh.
But yeah,
Quite the theory.
Interesting.
We'll go with it.
yeah, well, starting to see how my mind works here.
Do you ever do any work with the rattlesnakes and stuff? I know there is some up this way, but do you ever do any studying?
Yeah,
up
so
there? I know
we
there's a lot.
have. So for your listeners, there are rattlesnakes in the Northeast. In the big deer hunting states, where people track, there certainly are rattlesnakes in New York. There are rattlesnakes in Vermont and New Hampshire. There are no longer rattlesnakes in Maine. They historically occurred in Maine. But I would say that in all of those cases, that in the places, and certainly the time that you would be tracking, but even in the places that you would be tracking, so your big wood settings in the Northeast are not places that where those rattlesnake populations occur. So in Vermont, there are only 2 populations remaining of rattlesnakes.
Gotcha.
People in Vermont should know that rattlesnakes are considered one of the most endangered animals in the state. It would be
Right next to Bigfoot.
right next to Bigfoot. Yeah, we were on the trail of Bigfoot today.
We were. We
were you?
actually were. Yeah.
Oh shit.
We worked 7 longbeards this morning.
Yeah, you guys want to talk about that a little bit?
So it was pretty intense.
You came up here, right, to turkey hunt for the most part? Do you guys linked up, want to do some bird hunting?
Yep.
Seems like you turkey hunt all over the place.
I turkey hunt a lot.
Yep.
I try to turkey hunt. I try to get in as many days as possible each year.
Yep.
And so I'll start in Florida, and then I'll hunt. This year I hunted Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Vermont, and Mexico. So, but Vermont's been like, I told Isaac, it's been like, I kill a lot of turkeys. Kill like 5 to 10 turkeys a year, and just always multiple states. But Vermont, this is probably my 4th year hunting it. And it's just been this like nemesis for me.
Really?
I haven't been able to get a turkey in Vermont, and I've been on turkeys consistently. Like I'm in them almost every day that I hunt for. It just has not come together. So.
Sometimes they're a tricky bird.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tomorrow it's going to happen.
Figured them out
We had
today.
5 longbeards, single file, at like 70.
Oh, no shit.
We just set up on the wrong side of a little thick spot.
No hens with them? They're just coming?
Not with them.
Yeah. there was a hen in the vicinity, but she was off with another gobbler.
Couldn't
But yeah,
pull
it was
in.
so close. I mean,
Oh my god.
if I knew they were going away, I probably would have moved on them. I move on turkeys a lot, but they were just so close. It seemed like they were going to pop over this hill at any moment, and they moved off. But it was an exciting morning. They were gobbling.
Oh, crazy.
Gobbling.
We watched
their
them
heads
strutting, and yeah, it was pretty exciting.
Yep.
So,
It was.
So you're going back out tomorrow morning?
Yep. Same spot.
Right
We'll
back
get
in it.
after him. Yeah.
How many days you got up here?
I'm gonna hunt probably through Tuesday morning.
Tuesday. Gotcha. Yeah. It's a good turkey hunting state. It is. There seems like there's a lot of birds kicking around.
A lot of turkey hunters though.
There is.
You seemed like you were kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, I don't know why, but
Yeah. Oh man.
it did.
The
it
last
did
10
surprise me.
years. Last
That's
10
what it
years.
is, yeah.
It
There's-
seems like they've multiplied.
And especially around this area that I live in, there's a lot of turkey hunters.
Yeah.
Like I run into turkey hunters a lot if I'm in this area.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, if you get a bird really hot and bothered, you'll call in hunters.
Oh.
So if he's not coming like right away, that's what I always get worried about. I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
here comes Fred up over the hill. You know, like
You almost want him to be quiet.
exactly.
Quiet. I
yeah.
know where you are.
Gobble a couple times, come in. We'll make this easy. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. Turkey hunting's a lot of fun. It's a good way to stay in shape, and I'm always scouting for deer while I'm turkey hunting.
Yep.
So it's a great way to be in the woods, and I think the more you're in the woods, the better.
Absolutely. It was warm this morning, man. I went out and
Oh, it was.
had another Jake come in. I did the math. I've passed 14 Jakes up to this point.
It's pretty good.
This season.
This season.
Wow.
Usually it's like hardly any Jakes in my areas, but this year I've passed 14
Well,
Jakes.
next year's
Next
gonna
year's
be
gonna be
wild.
great.
So I'm thinking, hopefully. And then, I've missed a long beard, and a buddy that was with me, he missed a long beard. It's been a tough season for long beards, getting them in range and stuff. And then when we screwed the two opportunities we had up, but ton of Jakes this year up my way.
Yeah, I don't think I would have been able to pass 14 of them.
Yeah.
Right around number about 5, I would have been getting a little itchy.
It gets annoying
Some
after a
turkey
minute.
nuggets, let me tell you.
It's true.
They are good. So back to the tracking topic. I know you come up to the Northeast to track, but have you ever had the opportunity to track in those southern mountains? Because I know you get like a snow every once in a while. Mm-hmm. Has that ever happened?
Yeah, so I've done a little tracking out west as well.
Yeah.
I killed a couple mule deer on track.
Oh, okay.
Oh, nice.
And then, so yes, we probably get like 2 or 3 snowstorms a year. And, usually one's significant, maybe like 6 inches, and the other ones might be an inch or 2. And usually the inch or 2's gone that day, the next day, 6 inches probably gone in 2 days. So it's pretty rare. And then the other thing is that most of those snowstorms would be like after the deer season, January, February. But I have had a couple occasions, and I will say that even in January or February, when it snows, I go out and track deer, even though I can't carry a gun.
Yep.
Okay.
But that helps, just like you guys
Yeah.
would have here. You just learn these routes, like, oh, deer like to use that gap. We call it a gap, but you might call it a notch or a pass, or so I'll go track them to learn like that. But I have had a couple times during hunting season where I could track a deer, and it helped me kill one of my biggest mountain deer, in that I didn't kill it on the track, but I tracked it up to a high mountain, and I had to leave, but I saw the track going to the top of the mountain. And so the next day I went in, couldn't finish the track, and I had a work meeting. So the next day I come in, and I just went straight to the top of that mountain, and that deer was on the top mountain. I ended up killing it. But
No kidding.
but no, I've never killed a deer on a track in the Southern Mountains. It's so rare to have that opportunity. It's not. I mean, if it snowed, that's what I would do. But in the 13 years I've lived there, I mean, it's happened twice. So
Boy, I bet they wouldn't be looking on their backtrack down there. That'd be like some gravy. Woo!
You got any favorite tracking story in mind for up this way?
I would say. So the first thing I'd say is I've done it a fair amount now, but I only do it a couple days a year. I've never shot a deer tracking. I could have shot multiple deer, but again, when I'm up here, it's kind of like this adventure. Like I wouldn't just shoot any deer. I can shoot as many. Well, I can't. I can shoot up to 12 deer in Georgia. I never have a meat crisis because worst case scenario at the end of the season, I'll just go shoot some does in the low country. It's I don't want to say it's automatic, but it's pretty close to automatic. Yeah. So there's no meat issue. So anyways, I have. I've been close, or I've caught up to multiple deer that were smaller, a 6 point or what, and I just let them walk. And then I was telling you this story earlier, Isaac, but the only deer that I shot at up in these mountains was in the Southern Green Mountains here, and I had been tracking it, and I'd been listening to all the podcasts and reading all the books and just kind of digesting it, and this animal just. It followed the followed the book perfectly. It was moving. I was moving most of the day. Later in the day, towards midday, it was very obvious. It started feeding. First, I came up on a birch, and there was a mushroom, and I could see it pull the mushroom off this tree, and then it had moved up, and it scratched, and it looked like it might have been eating some ferns or something under the snow, and did it again, and then I moved up towards this knob, and this, he didn't see me, but he just happened to stand up when I was about 50 yards from me. Just stood up, kind of, and then just casually started walking away, like right in front of me. He wasn't walking away from me, and he was in some whips, and so I pulled up my gun, and he was a decent 8 point. I don't know exactly body size. I don't know exactly how to judge the body size up here, but I ended up shooting and hitting a small tree, which was heartbreaking. But I'll tell you a tracking story for out in Idaho, which was really incredible story. So we were up in southeast Idaho, right on the Wyoming border, and we had a camp set way back up in the mountains. We were hunting mule deer, and me and my buddy, I found this high meadow area. They had from where we were camping, it was a good, 3-4 mile hike in the morning, and you'd get up, you'd kind of go through this kind of spruce, fir, pine zone, and then you'd pop out on top of these mountains. They'd just be like open, rolling sagebrush meadows and elk and moose, beautiful. And there were 3 really nice mule deer kind of running around on these tops. And me and my buddy hunted them for multiple days. One day I missed one of them. She took a long shot, like a couple 100 yards plus, and missed. And then we were in them almost every day, but we screwed up on them multiple times. So anyways, we head home from our hunt. I get home like 9 o'clock that night, and I just tell my wife, I'm just like, I have to go back there. Like it was not complete. So I decided, I was like, I'm going to get up. It was far from my house too, just the drive to our son. I get up at like 2 a.m, so I go to sleep for 4 hours or whatever. Get up at 2 a.m, start driving there, and there's a blizzard, and it ends up. I should have got there by sunup, but because of all the snow, I ended up getting there probably about 10 o'clock, and I couldn't. I had to park maybe a mile from where we were parking previously because the snow was hitting the frame of my truck, and so I just parked it there, got out, went up this mountain, and I hiked around for a few hours, didn't see a single thing, and I was like, man, I can't find these deer. And so I'm walking out, and I start walking out, and I come in between these 2 like kind of big Christmas trees. I don't know if they were Doug firs or what they were, but anyways, and right behind each of them there's 2 deer beds, and these deer tracks get up out of these beds, and they kind of go opposite directions. And so I picked one, and I'll make the tracking story short, I guess, but it was the deer basically just kind of did a big circuit through these meadows, moving pretty consistently, and I ended up kind of coming up over a little sagebrush rise, and I just was peeking up, and he was just probably 30 yards in front of me, just kind of feeding away from me in the sagebrush, had his head down, didn't even know I was there, and I ended up shooting him, and he died right on the spot. But then this afternoon, I'm in like a foot of snow, and I got to get this giant mule deer out of the mountains. So I break the deer down, and I've got miles back to the truck. So I bring one load back, and for some reason I left my rifle on the deer carcass. So I leave my rifle, and I've got this pack, and I hike out, and actually it was interesting. On the way out, the other mule deer, which was even larger, came about 40 yards from me. It was just standing there looking at me. I was carrying his buddy on my back.
Oh, man.
And so then I hiked, long story short, I hiked that back to the truck, and I had to go back in. I had no food or water because I just, like I said, left in the middle of the night. And got the second load, and as I was coming up, as I was getting back to the carcass, I'll never forget this. I've never seen a mountain lion in the wild. I've seen wolverines in the wild and grizzly bears and all these animals. But a mountain lion track had come to my track where I hiked out and had followed my track out. And so I'm walking up, and all of a sudden I see there's a mountain lion track in my boot track. And I remember just kind of stopping and like looking around. And anyways, I never saw the mountain lion. And my gun was back on the
you
carcass.
left your gun on the deer.
So
that's going to be a little spooky, though. Your hair was up on your neck on that one all the way back, I bet.
Yeah.
Jeez.
What does a mule deer dress out at? Like, typically?
I don't weigh them.
Right.
So I couldn't give you, but they're certainly much larger than whitetails. Like, It wouldn't surprise me, like a big mule deer buck, if you're talking like dressed out, like a big whitetail, like a 250.
Ooh. Oh, really?
So that's kind of like
I might be wrong on that. I mean, but because I
thought they were bigger.
They're definitely bigger than whitetails.
I didn't know how much bigger.
Like, they're big.
They're
deer.
big. I know the racks are pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I'd like to go shoot
cool.
one day.
Super tall, wide ones.
Yep.
Yeah, they're fun. They really are. So, but I don't think you typically. That's kind of got lucky being able to. You oftentimes hunt them in the snow, but that's not how you would typically hunt mule deer.
Yeah.
No.
So.
Yeah. You usually guys don't track them out there.
I don't think so. Not that I heard of it. They're really like people do a lot of glassing, a lot of spots.
Really?
Like, there is a lot of great tracking out west, like in states like Idaho and Montana. As you get up into like kind of the northern, like northwest Montana and northern Idaho, and the Selkirks and the some of those mountain ranges up there, there's a lot of whitetails and a lot of big whitetails, and they get a lot of snow, and I've heard it's pretty good tracking. I've never done it, but
that would be fun.
That would be It always seems like there's some good whitetails out there. All of a sudden you see a picture every once in a while.
I think Cal Blood and Joe Donito went out there a few years ago to Montana. They got 2 big ones. Yeah.
There's probably not. Is there probably not a lot of trackers out there? I would imagine.
Probably not as many as there is around.
I wouldn't think so.
No, just not. Hasn't made its way out there yet, I guess.
I see a big wave of it tracking, that is, in like Michigan, like the UP, and like Wisconsin, and Minnesota even. Like, I think that's pretty cool. It's kind of like working its way east to west, which is almost opposite of a lot of the other hunting trends. It's usually west to east. So it's kind of cool to see them.
There's some videos popping up of some guys doing tracking
taking
out there.
After us.
It seems like the woods are pretty similar up there as they're
for sure.
Like Maine and
especially
stuff like that.
Up in the UP.
It's funny how that sets up like that.
Yeah, it's just that north, latitude.
Yep. All right, so we talked about the differences between how the woods set up in the southern part of the United States versus up here, but we didn't really talk about how you guys hunt them down there.
So like we said, we rarely have snow. And so, first of all, I'll say that there's probably a whole lot of ways to hunt these animals. But like you guys up here, there's a group of guys down there that consistently hunt the big woods, and there's a group of guys that I hunt with, and we've kind of come up with a strategy over time that if we implement that, again, maybe 2-3 opportunities, say at a mature, at least 3.5, maybe like 4.5-year-old deer in a season. So I mentioned acorn mass, so it kind of starts with that. And kind of the first thing we do is throughout the summer, you start assessing where the acorns are and are there a pattern to them. Because again, if acorns are everywhere, if acorns are only high, if acorns are only low, if acorns are kind of low everywhere, but maybe patchy where you can find a patch here and there, that's going to really, it's going to influence everything, the bears, the turkeys, and the deer. And so we start there, and that just kind of gives me a general idea of where to start looking. But then we're looking for what I like to call buck pockets. So their deer density is really low, kind of like, you know, the mountains around here. I mean, really low. And so as you hike through these mountains, you know, the majority of the area, and I'm talking about like rut signs of rubs and scrapes, like you just don't see that everywhere. You go to South Georgia, you go on some of these properties, there's kind of buck sign everywhere. I mean, there might be slight concentrations of it, but I mean, you'll walk these big mountain ridges and there'll be nothing. But there are these areas that I call buck pockets where, you know, you hit, say, a certain ridge top or a certain bench. You know, maybe it's a spot down low if acorns are only down low that year, and where you'll find very high concentrations of buck sign. And, you know, and that could be, you know, an area might be 100 acres or less, but you know, that has 50 some odd rubs. It's just a real concentration of buck sign. And I mean, that sounds probably to a lot of your listeners like, oh, go look for the buck sign. Like that's what you do everywhere, right? But you have to think of this landscape like it's this big, like White Mountains type landscape, and these pockets are not everywhere. They're not on every ridge. So you really have to go out and find them. And so what we do is we go out, spend a lot of time hiking. So you're just walking through the mountains, and you're looking for these pockets of buck sign. And that's kind of the key in my mind. And then once you identify those, I kind of catalog them away because, you know, sometimes depending on the acorns, one might not be used in a year, but sometimes you'll have ones that are used over and over as well. So I kind of catalog them in my head or catalog them on my phone. And then what I do is go into those, and that's where we hunt. Like it makes, in most of the areas down there in the southern Appalachians, if you just pull down a Forest Service road, walk 100 yards off the road and sit down, you almost might as well stay home. I mean, you're in the woods,
right?
But like just finding those pockets right there raises your chances. And so what a lot of people will probably key in on is that we're primarily hunting them like leading into the rut and through the rut. And so if people remember what I was saying, that's December time frame. So it's really kind of like mid-November through December that I'm hunting the mountains. Before that, I'm really hunting bears. I'm focused on bears. I mean, if I saw a deer, I'd shoot it if it's a good one, but focused on bears. Then I make a switch about mid-November, and then I'm focusing on deer. Hiking, looking for these pockets. So then you find a pocket, you're hunting the pocket, and then you start using more, you know, methodologies that people would use anywhere. You know, now you've found an area where you know that a mature deer might be based. You might put cameras in that area. I typically don't use cameras, but anymore. I used to use cameras a lot. I don't now. But you might use cameras. I hunt a lot by getting in kind of like topographic features, you know, different like gaps or saddles. I think about the rhododendron, as I was talking about earlier. Like oftentimes if I'm going to sit, the way I'm set up is it's like it gives me the opportunity where I'm like spying somehow into the rhododendron. I'm either watching like a trail that's kind of just in the edge. I'm watching into a chute somehow that goes into the rhododendron. I'm in like a hidden like open area, like a little 5-acre area in the middle of a sea of rhododendron. So that's part of it. So, but then sometimes when it rains, I like to move. So then I'll, you know, kind of still hunt through those areas. I'll do a fair amount of calling and rattling. But again, the key is finding those pockets and not just going out and hunting anywhere. Even just going to a saddle or something, maybe that ups your probability a little bit. But when you can find these concentrations of deer sign, it's key there because they're pretty rare. But when you get into those, typically you're gonna, you know, get into a mature buck. I don't know why. I don't see that Like again in South Georgia, I don't see that here when I hunt.
Yeah.
Like I've never found an area I was like, oh my God, this is, but like I see that in these southern mountains where I'm hiking through the mountains. It's like, oh my God, look at that rub. Oh, there's a rub, and it's just like this concentration, and then that concentration is kind of in a sea of very little buck sign. So yeah, and there's a lot of like nuance there in terms of the technique with we talked a little bit earlier, Isaac, about like the gear. Like, so these buck pockets, once you find them and you're hunting them, one might be 5 miles off in the mountains. So imagine, it might be a mile, might be closer, but typically they're far away. So you're getting in there. Oftentimes, if you're going to sit, you might do an all-day sit if you can. And so you're going to hike in, say, 5 miles in like a White Mountain type landscape, and then you're going to sit all day. And it's probably in the 20s, so it's cold. So you got to think about, I carry a full-size backpack like I do Western hunting, and I have full changes of clothes. And so I hike in the dark, and get to my spot, say I'm going to sit in a certain gap within this buck pocket. So like a gap or a saddle or a notch, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to sit there, and I get in there, and I'm, all sweated up. And I literally strip off every piece of clothes I have, and I have in my backpack. I completely change my clothes all the way down to my socks and underwear, and I have all these other strategies for staying warm, just different pieces of gear that I'll use. And so thinking about a lot of those types of things is really critical.
You wear snake gaiters?
Not
there?
That time of year.
No.
No.
I was curious. People hunt in the south because there's definitely more snakes down
there.
Yeah,
there are more snakes. I don't see a lot of snakes hunting, but I oftentimes wear them during turkey season in particular.
Okay.
So.
Right, a little warmer because when it's that cold, they're pretty docile.
Oh,
they're underground.
Right?
They're
Underground. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So if people want to follow you and keep up with you, where can they find you?
I would say the best place would be to find me on Instagram, which is at Dr. C.L. Jenkins. So DRCLJENKINS. People can also check out our website, the Orianne Society, which is at www.orianne.org. And then finally, I'd tell people to check out Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and you can basically find that in all social media under Backcountry Hunters.
Yep.
So,
and you do a podcast too, right?
I do a podcast as well. If any of you are interested in snakes, I do a snake podcast called Snake Talk, and we do just a wide variety of things. We might have an expert come on to, we had an episode, for example, called Everything Copperheads, or we might, we just talk about ecology and natural history. I have ones on snake bite, on snake handling churches, on a whole variety of things. And actually, some of your listeners might be interested. I don't have the episode off the top of my head, but we did an episode on the Pennsylvania system for managing timber rattlesnakes, which is linked to hunting. So if you buy like your, I don't know what they call it, your sportsman package in Pennsylvania, you get a rattlesnake tag.
Really?
And I talked to the state biologist who runs that, and we went all through kind of the development of that management plan and implementation for the rattlesnakes, and we talk about the harvest season and all the regulations around it. And, it's fascinating, and to be honest, the message of that podcast episode is that it's hunting that really helped timber rattlesnakes really kind of stabilize and recover in that state.
That's pretty cool.
Interesting.
Are they the only state that has like a tag for hunting rattlesnakes?
That's a good question. I don't know of another. There are certainly many states where you can kill snakes.
Okay.
Up here you can't. Like,
right.
I mean,
They're endangered.
like in Vermont, they're one of the most endangered species. You can get into real serious trouble.
Yeah.
But there are definitely some states where you can kill them and not get in trouble. In terms of other states that have a real season on them, like you would for a game species, I should know that, and I don't. But Pennsylvania is the great example that everybody kind of looks to.
Cool. There's some states you can kill them like sight unseen, isn't there?
Yep.
Yep.
Georgia would be one of those.
Okay, gotcha. So if they're on your property, wherever you run into one, you're more than welcome to kill them.
Yeah, it's perfectly legal.
Gotcha.
Unless there's like a federal layer like above above the state. But, you know, at this time, we don't have that with any of the venomous snakes in Georgia.
Gotcha. Cool.
So,
anything else you guys want to add in? That's a good way to end it right there.
Oh, yeah. I think it was a good podcast.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing this with us. We appreciate it.
It's
awesome to get some unique perspectives from other parts of the country, because even down there, it seems like there's a lot of similarities to up here, and then a lot of major differences too. So it's good to see and contrast those things. But thanks again.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.